He looked me in the eye at my grandmother's kitchen table, surrounded by 14 members of our family, and said, "You only got into that college because they felt sorry for you. Let's be honest, you're not the smart one." My Uncle Gerald said that to me on the day I came home to share the best news of my life. I had just been accepted into the pharmacy school program at Westfield University. Full scholarship. I was the first person in our family to go beyond a 2-year community college. And he sat there, fork in hand, half a piece of sweet potato pie in his mouth, and said that to me in front of everyone. My grandmother's hands went still over her cornbread. My cousin Tasha looked at her plate. My Aunt Roberta suddenly needed to check on something in the kitchen. Nobody said a word. I smiled. I said, "Thank you for sharing that, Uncle Gerald." And I passed him the butter dish like nothing had happened. But something had happened. And what happened next, over the following 4 years, would change every single thing I thought I knew about my family, about loyalty, and about what it costs a woman to stay quiet in a room full of people who have decided who she is. Before I go any further, if this story is speaking to you already, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your city and the time where you are in the comments. I'd love to know who's listening. My name is Simone. I'm 29 years old. I'm a licensed pharmacist. And this is the story of how I almost let my family talk me out of my own life. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the day of the sweet potato pie. Further back, to the house on Clover Street. My grandmother, Nana Bet, raised 6 children in a 3-bedroom house with 1 bathroom, a window unit air conditioner that only worked in July, and a vegetable garden she tended from April through October with the same devotion some people give to religion. She was the kind of woman who got up before the sun and went to bed after everyone else, and never once complained about the order of those 2 things. Her house smelled like vanilla extract and pine sol, and every surface in it was clean. Not hotel clean. Church clean. The kind of clean that says, I may not have much, but I have standards. My mother, Diane, was her second youngest. Quiet where her siblings were loud. Careful where they were impulsive. She worked at the county hospital as a medical records clerk for 22 years, filing other people's histories while quietly building her own. She read books the way other people watched television. Compulsively, constantly, like the answers to things were in there if she just kept looking. My father left when I was 4. I don't have many memories of him. What I have is the shape of his absence, the way my mother learned to do everything alone and made it look so natural that I didn't understand until I was much older that it wasn't supposed to be that way. What I did have, what I grew up surrounded by, was my mother's family. The Carters. 6 siblings, their spouses, their children, their opinions. Every holiday at Nana Betty's house on Clover Street. Every birthday, every graduation, every crisis. The Carters showed up. That was the thing about them. They showed up. The problem with a family that always shows up is that sometimes they show up for the wrong reasons. My mother's oldest brother, Gerald Carter, was what people in our family called the provider. He owned a car dealership on the east side of town that his father-in-law had helped him buy into in 1997. He had a nice house, a Cadillac Escalade, and a laugh that filled whatever room he walked into. He was generous with money when he wanted people to know he was being generous. He paid for my cousin Caleb Baxter's first car. He covered Nana Betty's furnace when it died in February. And he expected to be thanked for all of it. Loudly. Repeatedly. In front of other people. Gerald had an opinion about everything and a habit of delivering those opinions as though he were reading from a document someone had already approved. He was confident the way only a man who has never truly been challenged can be confident. Easy. Unexamined. He had 3 daughters of his own. All 3 of them worked at the dealership in some capacity. His oldest, Keisha, managed the front office. His middle, Brianna, handled social media. His youngest, Destiny, was still in high school but already had a summer job answering phones. None of them had gone away to college. And I don't think Gerald had ever forgiven my mother for raising a daughter who wanted to. I was an academic kid. Not because anyone pushed me. Because I found it genuinely interesting. I liked the way problems had structures. I liked that if you understood the structure, you could find the answer. Science especially. The logic of it calmed something in me that nothing else did. My mother couldn't afford tutors or test prep or any of that. What she did was take me to the library every Saturday morning and let me stay until it closed. She'd read at the table across from me, and we'd walk home in the late afternoon carrying stacks of books like we'd just done the week's grocery shopping. She never told me what I should want to be. She just made sure I had access to every possible thing I could become. When I was 15, I shadowed a pharmacist at the hospital where she worked. His name was Mr. Okafor, and he was the kind of man who explained things the way you wished every teacher had. He showed me how a single milligram difference in a dosage could change a patient's outcome. How the pharmacist was often the last line of defense between a prescription and a mistake. How the work was invisible when it was done right and catastrophic when it wasn't. I walked out of that hospital at my grandmother's kitchen and told my mother I knew surrounded by 14 members of our family. She smiled the way she smiled when something mattered to her. You only got into that college but she didn't want to make a big deal of it yet. Let's be honest, she just said, "You're not the smart one." Then let's figure out how to get you there. My Uncle Gerald said that to me on the day I came home to share the best news of my life. I studied just been accepted into the pharmacy school program. I got a part-time job at 16 at a pharmacy chain 3 buses away. I was the first person in our family to go beyond a 2-year I applied for every scholarship I could find. And he sat there, I wrote essays until my hands half a piece of sweet potato pie in his mouth. When the acceptance letter came from Westfield, my grandmother's in the school parking lot for 10 minutes before I called my cousin Tasha looked at her. She cried too. My aunt Roberta suddenly needed to check on something in the kitchen. Bring that letter over. Nobody said a word. I want to hold it. I smiled. She held it with both hands. Thank you for sharing that. It was something fragile. She traced my name on the dish like nothing had happened. My girl, something had happened. That was all. And what happened next? We decided to share the following 4 years. Dinner. The whole family every single thing I thought I knew about my family, about she wore her blue dress, and about what it cost. She was so proud she couldn't stop smiling. In a room full of people, and she kept trying to hide it, pressing her lips together. Before I go any further, if this story is speaking to you already, that was the dinner where Gerald said, "Please take a moment to like and subscribe. Here is what I want you to understand about that moment. Drop your city and the time where you were in the comments. It wasn't the first time. Gerald had been making comments about my education. My name is Simone. Since I started 29 taking honors classes, I'm a licensed pharmacist. When I got into this is the story of how I almost let my family don't let that go to her head, Diane. Those programs set kids up to be disappointed. Not the day of the sweet potato pie. When I won the regional science competition in 9th grade, to the house on Clover Street. They give those things out to make kids feel good. Nana Bet doesn't mean much children in a 3-bedroom house. When I scored in the top 3% a window unit college conditioner that only worked in July, test scores don't make you smart. She tended life makes you smart. October with the ask same anyone who's run a business give to religion. Every time she was the kind of woman who got up every time the sun. She changed the subject after everyone else or found never once complained about the order of those. I used to think she was keeping the peace. Her house smelled like vanilla extract. I understand now she was managing a man who had decided every surface a long time ago that my success was somehow a comment on his daughter's choices. The kind of clean that says every step I climbed made him feel like they were standing still. My mother, Diane, rather than examine that feeling, he aimed it at me. Quiet where her siblings after the sweet potato pie dinner. Careful where they drove home in my mother's car. She worked at the county hospital as a medical records clerk, and I sat in her driveway for a while without filing other people's histories. It was a warm night in late building her own. The street lights were just books the way other people watched television. I could see my mother's kitchen light through the curtain. Constantly, I thought about quitting. The answers to things I want to be honest about she just kept because I think people assume my father left when I was 4. Like never doubted. I don't have many memories of him. I sat in that car is the shape of his absence. Maybe he's right. The way my mother got learned to do everything maybe alone I'll get there and made it look so natural everyone will that I didn't understand right all until I was much older. I was 18 years old and I had just achieved something what real. I did have, what I grew up surrounded voice by in the room was my mother's told family. Me it didn't count. The Carters. I went inside. 6 siblings. My mother was washing the children their opinions. She heard me come in. Every holiday at Nana Betty's house on Clover Street. I said. Every birthday, she said. Every graduation. Why didn't you say anything? Crisis. She set down the dish in her hand. That was the thing. Turned off the water. They showed up. Around. The problem with a family that always shows up is that sometimes they show up in a specific way. Not sleepy. My mother's oldest brother, Gerald Carter, because if I say something, what people in our family called the provider. And if it car dealership on the east side of Christmas is ruined and Nana Bet is helped him buy into and everyone takes sides and it goes on. He had a nice house, a Cadillac gone in August, and a laugh that filled whatever room he walked into. And I'll still be here. He was generous with money when he wanted people to know. I still don't, not entirely. But I thought about my cousin Caleb Baxter's first how silence as strategy covered Nana Betty's furnace when it died in February. How keeping the peace has a price. And he expected to be thanked for all of it. And how that price usually is paid by the person who's already losing something. In front of other people. I went to Westfield Gerald had an opinion about everything. I threw myself into the habit of delivering those opinions. Pharmacology, chemistry, reading from a document someone had already It was hard in the way that real things are hard. He was confident the way only a man who has never truly been challenged acquiring everything you had and then a little more. Unexamined. I loved it. I called my mother every Sunday. All 3 of them told me what was happening at home in that careful way she had. His oldest, editing as she went, managed the front office, leaving out the things she didn't want me to worry about. handled social
I learned to
media.
read what she wasn't
His youngest
saying.
destiny,
What she
was
wasn't
still
saying,
in high school,
I
but
gradually
already had a summer
understood,
job answering
was that
phones.
Gerald had started talking.
None of them had gone away
Not
to
to me,
college.
to everyone
And I don't
else.
think Gerald
The
had
story
ever
he was
forgiven
telling,
my mother for
I heard
raising a
pieces
daughter
of it on
who wanted
holidays
to.
when I came
I was an
home.
academic kid.
His version went
not
like
because
this.
anyone pushed me.
Simone was up there
because I
spending
found
money
it
the
genuinely
family
interesting.
didn't have on a degree
I liked
she'd
the way
never
problems
used.
had structures.
She thought she was better
I liked
than
that if
everyone
you
now.
understood the structure,
She never called
you
Nana
could
Bet.
find the answer.
She was too busy
Science
being
especially.
important.
The
The
logic
truth
of it
was,
calmed something
my
in me
scholarship
that nothing
covered
else
tuition
did.
and housing.
My mother couldn't
My mother
afford
paid
tutors
nothing.
or test
I
prep
called
or
Nana
any of
Bet
that.
every 2 weeks
What
on
she did
Sunday
was take me to the
evenings,
library
and she would
every
tell me about
Saturday
her
morning,
garden,
and I
and
would
would
tell
let me
her what
stay
I was
until it
learning.
closed.
And she would say,
She'd read at the table
"Keep going,
across from
baby.
me.
Keep
And we'd
going."
walk home in the late
I was not too
afternoon
busy
to
carrying
call.
stacks of books.
I was too
like
far
we'd just
away to
done the
drive
week's
home for
grocery
every
shopping,
event.
which
She
is
never
different.
told me what I should
But
want to
truth
be.
doesn't travel
She
the
just
same
made sure I had
roads as a
access
story
to every
told by a
possible
man
thing I
with a
could
deep
become.
voice and strong
When I was
opinions,
15,
and a
I
table
shadowed
full
a
of people who
pharmacist
owe
at
him
the hospital
favors.
where she worked.
My cousin Caleb
His name
Baxter
was
texted
Mr.
me
Okafor,
one night during
and he
my
was the
second
kind of
year.
man who
It was
explained
11
things the way
p.m.
you wished every
I was
teacher
studying in
had.
the library.
He showed me
The
how a
message
single
said,
milligram difference
"Why haven't
in
you
a
called
dosage
Nana?
could change a
She's
patient's
been asking
outcome.
about you." How the
You forget where
pharmacist
you
was
came
often
from.
the last line
I
of
stared at
defense
that
between a
message in the
prescription
library light
and a mistake,
and felt something I
how the
hadn't
work
felt
was
since I
invisible
left
when it
home.
was done right
Small,
and catastrophic.
the
when it
specific
wasn't.
smallness of being misrepresented by people who know better. I called Caleb Baxter the next morning. I told him I had called Nana Bet 11 days ago, that we'd talked for 40 minutes about her tomato plants and my clinical rotation, and that if he wanted to have a conversation about who was checking on her, we could compare calendars. He went quiet. Then he said, "Dad said you hadn't called in a month." "Your dad was wrong," I said. A long pause. "Okay," Caleb Baxter said finally. "My bad. I let it go. I shouldn't have." The pattern continued. Every time I came home, something had shifted slightly. A joke that had an edge to it. A comment about city girls. An assumption that I thought I was too good for something. Invitations that came late, after decisions had already been made. The feeling of standing slightly outside a room I had grown up inside. Gerald was the center of gravity in our family. He had been for decades. And he had decided that my presence, my insistence on a different kind of life, was a disruption to a social order that benefited him. I say this without bitterness. I came to understand it as information, not injury. He was protecting something. It just wasn't me. The summer before my final year, I came home for Nana Betty's 75th birthday. The whole family was there. Gerald had rented a pavilion at the park and set up tables and a catering spread and a sound system playing old Motown. It was genuinely lovely. He did things like that, big, visible, generous things, and they were real. They just came with a ledger. After dinner, when the music slowed and people were moving in smaller groups, Gerald found me at the dessert table. "So," he said, in that tone that meant he'd been thinking about what to say and had landed on something he was pleased with. "Last year. Then what?" "Then I take my boards," I said. "Get licensed. Get a job. And you're coming back here?" "I don't know yet." He nodded slowly. "Your mama could use the help, you know. She's not getting younger." I looked at him. "She's 51, Uncle Gerald. I'm just saying. Some people go off and forget their people." "I haven't forgotten anyone," I said. He smiled. The smile he used when he wanted to seem like he was just asking questions. "Keisha's been running my front office for 4 years. Good money. Benefits. She bought her house last year. 26 years old." He looked at me the way men look at women when they're trying to make a point without saying it directly. "Just an option. In case things don't work out the way you're planning." I excused myself to go find my grandmother. I found her in a lawn chair near the edge of the pavilion, watching her great-grandchildren run in the grass, her face soft with something between happiness and memory. I sat in the chair next to her and didn't say anything for a moment. "He's been at you," she said, without looking at me. It wasn't a question. "A little," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Gerald has always been afraid of women who know what they want. Don't let him make that your problem." It was the most direct thing she had ever said to me about her own son. I held on to it for the rest of that last year. I graduated in May. The ceremony was outside on a warm Saturday, and the whole family came. My mother sat in the third row in a yellow dress she had bought specifically for this occasion and cried from the moment my name was called until we got to the parking lot. Nana Bet sat beside her, perfectly upright, clapping with both hands over her head like she was at a revival. Even Gerald came. He shook my hand and said, "Congratulations." No other comment. Just that. I think it cost him something, and I appreciated it more than I probably should have.
I accepted a position at a hospital in Millfield, 40 minutes from home. Not because I felt obligated to stay close. Because it was a genuinely good position. Clinical pharmacist in the oncology unit, working with patients undergoing chemotherapy, managing complex medication regimens. Exactly the kind of work Mr. Okafor had described to me in that hospital corridor when I was 15. I moved into a small apartment in Millfield. I started the job. I was good at it, and I knew I was good at it, not with arrogance but with the quiet certainty that comes from years of preparation meeting the right work. I went home on weekends once or twice a month. Things felt almost normal for a while. And then Nana Bet got sick. It started with fatigue she dismissed as getting older. Then a persistent cough she said was allergies. My mother noticed first that she was losing weight without trying. They went to the doctor in October. The diagnosis came back in November, stage 2 lung cancer. She had never smoked a day in her life. The doctor said it didn't matter. These things happened. He said they caught it early enough that treatment was realistic. He recommended a specific chemotherapy protocol and said they should discuss the oncology team's plan at their next appointment. I happened to be at my mother's house the evening they came home from that appointment. Nana Bet sat in the living room chair in her good coat, still wearing it like she hadn't had the energy to take it off, and she looked tired in a way I had never seen her look before. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed and her jaw tight. I sat across from Nana Bet and I said, "Tell me exactly what they said." She told me, and as she talked, I pulled out my phone and started taking notes. Not because I doubted the doctors, because I knew the system. I knew that patients, especially older women, especially older Black women, were often given information once and expected to retain it under stress. I knew the medication names and the interaction risks and what questions hadn't been asked yet. The following week, I took a personal day and went to that appointment with them. I sat in the room and I asked the questions. I asked about the specific chemo agents, the dosing schedule, the anti-nausea protocol, the monitoring plan, the warning signs that should bring her to the ER immediately. The oncologist answered every one with respect and without impatience, which I appreciated. On the drive home, Nana Bet reached over from the passenger seat and patted my hand. "I'm glad you were there," she said. "I'm going to be at every one," I said. And I was. Every single appointment, for the 8 months of her treatment. I coordinated with her primary care physician about her other medications. I drove her when my mother couldn't. I sat in waiting rooms doing shift work on my laptop, so I could keep my hours flexible. I kept a medication log, tracked her symptoms, knew which side effects to expect and which ones to call about. Gerald visited twice. Both times he stayed less than an hour. He brought flowers the first time and a fruit basket the second time. Both times, he told Nana Bet she looked great when she clearly did not and said, "You've got the best doctors," as though that settled the matter. My mother said nothing. The whisper campaign started about 3 months into Nana Betty's treatment. I was aware of it only in the way you become aware of weather. Not by seeing it directly, but by the way people start carrying umbrellas. A cousin who seemed cooler at a family gathering. An aunt who didn't invite me to a birthday dinner that I heard about after the fact. A text from Caleb Baxter that said, "Hey, hope you're doing okay. I heard things have been hard for you." I didn't know what he meant. When I asked, he was vague. Just said he'd heard I'd been stressed. I was not stressed. I was busy. There's a difference. The clearer picture came from my cousin Tasha, who had always been direct with me in the way people are direct with each other when they grew up in the same rooms. She called me one Tuesday evening when I was on my lunch break and said, "I need to tell you something because you deserve to know." Gerald had been calling people. Extended family, church friends of Nana Betty's, neighbors on Clover Street. His version of things. Simone thought she knew better than the doctors. She'd been overstepping at appointments, making the nurses uncomfortable, asking questions that were out of line. She'd upset Nana Bet with all her questions and made her worry more than she needed to. She wasn't as helpful as she wanted people to think. I sat in the break room of the hospital where I worked saving people's lives and listened to this story about myself and felt the floor shift. "Who's believing this?" I asked Tasha. A pause. "Some people," she said. "Aunt Roberta. A few of the church ladies. I don't think Caleb Baxter fully does, but he doesn't know what to say. And my mother? She's not saying anything." Of course she wasn't. I want to stop here and tell you something about silence because I've been living inside this question for years now. Silence is protection. My mother had been practicing it her whole life. She had watched Gerald run over people at family gatherings since they were children, and she had learned, the way you learn to avoid a wet floor, to step around him. She had built her life in the spaces Gerald didn't occupy. Small spaces. Safe ones. What she hadn't accounted for was what happened when those spaces got smaller. When Gerald decided, for whatever reason, that her daughter's life was something he had a stake in. She called me that Friday night. "I know Tasha told you," she said, before I could say anything. "Mom, I don't know what to do," she said. And her voice was so small that I felt something in my chest that was both grief and fury in the same place. "You don't have to do anything," I said. "I'm going to handle it. Simone, if you..." "Mom, I'm going to handle it." She was quiet for a long moment. "Don't blow up the family." I wanted to say, he already did that. I am just the only one willing to look at the smoke. I didn't say it. Not yet. Here's what I did instead. I collected evidence the way I had been trained to do in a professional setting. I am a pharmacist. My job is precision. Documentation. Knowing what happened and when and being able to prove it. I pulled my calendar for the 8 months since Nana Betty's diagnosis. I had attended 11 appointments with her. I had been present for 6 of those in person and available by phone for 2 more when her primary doctor had questions. I had coordinated with the oncology team on 4 separate occasions regarding medication adjustments. I had an email thread with her oncologist's nurse coordinator. I had saved every text I had ever sent to or received from Nana Bet, my mother, and various family members during this period. I also had something else. I had Nana Bet. I went to see her on a Sunday in February, 8 months after her diagnosis, 3 months before the family event that would change everything. She was in the kitchen in her housecoat making tea, moving more slowly than she used to but upright, steady, her color better than it had been in the fall. Her latest scans had shown significant reduction in the tumor. The oncologist was cautiously optimistic. I sat at her kitchen table, and I told her what I had heard. She didn't look surprised. She set down her mug and folded her hands on the table in front of her and looked at me with those eyes that had seen everything. "He said that?" she asked. "That's what I was told." She was quiet for a moment. "Gerald has always had trouble," she said carefully, "with people who do things he doesn't understand. Nana, he's telling people I upset you. That I was out of line at your appointments." She looked at me directly. "You have never been out of line, baby. Not once. Those doctors know you by name. That nurse coordinator told me last month that she wished every patient had someone like you." A pause. "I want you to know that." "I know that," I said. "But other people don't." She nodded slowly. She picked up her mug again. And she said, "Then maybe it's time they did." Nana Betty's end-of-treatment celebration was in May. The scans had come back clean. The oncologist said the word remission. She wanted the whole family together, and she wanted it at the house on Clover Street, not at a rented pavilion. She planned it herself. Called everyone personally. She was old-fashioned about invitations the same way she was old-fashioned about everything. You didn't mail a card when you could pick up a phone. I came straight from a Saturday morning shift. I was wearing my work clothes, nice slacks and a button-down, my hospital badge still clipped to my pocket, which I noticed only when I got out of the car. I left it on. The backyard of Clover Street was everything it had always been. The folding tables with the checkered cloth, the big cooler of sweet tea and lemonade, the grill someone had dragged out of the garage. Nana Betty's garden along the fence, the tomatoes just coming in, the herbs she'd been growing for 40 years. String lights that one of my uncles had strung between the fence posts years ago, and no one had ever taken down. 14 people. Not huge, but everyone who mattered was there. My mother in a yellow sundress. My aunts. My cousins. Gerald and his wife Pamela in matching polo shirts, Gerald holding court near the grill as though this were his event. My mother saw me arrive, and her eyes went to my badge and then to my face, and I gave her a look that said, "It's fine." She did not look convinced. Nana Bet came out of the back door, and the whole yard settled into a warm, collective exhale. She was wearing her church dress. She had her hair done. She looked genuinely like herself again. Everyone gathered around her. Gerald moved first, the way he always did, getting to the center of things before someone else could. "Look at you," he said, spreading his arms. "My mama, fighting champion." He said it like he'd been part of the fight. Nana Bet smiled at him the way she smiled at all of her children. With love and without illusion. We ate. We talked. Someone put on music. The afternoon moved the way those afternoons always had, children weaving between the adults, conversations layered over each other. The kind of ease that only comes from decades of shared history. And then, because Gerald was Gerald, it changed. It started subtly. He was talking to a group that included my Uncle Terence and two of Nana Betty's church friends. A loud enough conversation that people nearby could hear. He was talking about how glad he was that his mother had good doctors. That he'd made sure she got the best care available. That he'd been her support system through the whole thing. He had visited twice. For a combined total of less than 2 hours. I kept eating. I didn't look up. Then he said, with the particular casual cruelty of someone who knows exactly what they're saying. It's funny how some people show up acting like experts and end up causing more stress than they prevent. You know what I mean? The medical people especially. Think they know better than the family. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. Nana Betty's church friend, Miss Audrey, glanced over at me with an expression that was half confusion and half sympathy. Which meant she'd heard the other version of this story. Gerald's version. My Aunt Roberta, who was sitting 2 seats from me, shifted slightly in her chair the way people shift when they've decided not to interfere. My mother found something very interesting to look at in her potato salad. I set down my fork. Not dramatically. Slowly. The way I set things down in the pharmacy when I am about to give someone information they need to hear. I want to say something, I said. My voice was calm. It was genuinely calm, not performed calm. I have spent years learning how to stay level when people around me are frightened or grieving or in pain. That skill does not turn off. Gerald turned. The group around him turned. And because voices carry in a backyard, more people turned than probably needed to. I want to say it because I've heard a version of a story going around about me and Nana's care, and I'd like to offer some facts. Gerald's face did the thing it always did when he was recalibrating. A small shift. A tightening. Nobody's talking about you, Simone, he said with a laugh that had no warmth in it. I was at 11 of Nana Betty's oncology appointments, I said. I have the calendar. I coordinated with her medical team on 4 separate occasions about her medication regimen. I have the email thread. I have the notes from those conversations. The nurse coordinator told Nana last month. Nana, you can confirm this, that she wished every patient had someone in my role. Nana Bet, from her chair, said quietly and clearly. That's what she said. Gerald's wife Pamela looked at her husband. This is not the time or place, Gerald said, lower now. You brought it up, I said. At Nana's table, at her celebration. So I'd like to finish. I looked around the yard, not to perform, but because I had learned from him, ironically, that when you speak to a group, you look at the group. I haven't been causing stress. I've been doing my job. The job I've been trained to do. The same job that I do every single day for patients who don't have anyone at their appointments advocating for them. Nana was fortunate enough to have someone who understood her treatment. And I will not sit at this table and let that be reframed as a problem. The yard was quiet in the way it gets when something real has been said. Gerald opened his mouth. Gerald, that was Nana Bet. She said it once. She said it the way she must have said it when he was 8 years old, and she was the only authority he recognized. He closed his mouth. Simone was there, Nana said to the yard, to everyone. She was there at every appointment that mattered. She asked questions I didn't know to ask. She stayed late and came early, and she never once made me feel like a burden. Her voice was steady. Not angry. Just sure. She is the reason I understood what was happening in my own body. And I will not have that minimized at my own table. Nobody spoke. Miss Audrey, from her chair, said softly, Amen. Gerald sat down. If that had been the end, it would have been enough. But it wasn't the end. Because after the cake was cut and the music came back on and people started drifting into smaller conversations, my cousin Caleb Baxter found me near the garden. He was holding a cup of sweet tea with both hands, looking like a man working up to something. I owe you an apology, he said. I waited. My dad told me things. About the appointments. About you overstepping. I half believed him because he stopped. I don't have a good reason. He's my dad and it felt easier. I know, I said. I texted you that thing about forgetting where you came from. He looked at the tomato plants. That wasn't right. It wasn't, I agreed. But I know why you did it. He looked at me. How are you not angrier right now? I thought about that. Because I'm tired, I said. And because I understand what it's like to be in a room with someone like your father and feel like the safest thing is to go along. A long pause. He does that, Caleb Baxter said quietly. He does that to all of us. It was the most honest thing Caleb Baxter had ever said to me, and I held it like it was delicate. I know, I said. I think your grandmother knows too. Here is what happened after. A week later, my Aunt Roberta called me. She is not a woman who calls to apologize, and she did not exactly apologize, but she said, I should have spoken up at that dinner. When he made that comment about you getting in because they felt sorry for you. I should have said something. It had been 11 years since that dinner. I had long stopped expecting this call. Why are you telling me now? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Because I watched your grandmother correct her own son at her cancer celebration, and it made me realize I've been letting him speak over people for a long time, including over you. And you turned out to be exactly who you said you were going to be. A pause. I'm sorry it took me this long to say that out loud. I didn't know what to do with that call for a few days. I turned it over. It wasn't enough to erase a decade of comments allowed to pass without objection. But it was something. It was a woman recognizing her own complicity. And that is not nothing. Gerald did not call. Gerald has not called in the months since Nana Betty's celebration to address anything that happened that day. He has not apologized. He has not acknowledged the story he told about me or the damage it did. At Christmas, he shook my hand. We were polite. We are family, which means we are connected in ways that don't depend on resolution. But the room was different. The gravity had shifted. Not because Gerald had changed, but because the people around him had started to see the pattern. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. My mother stood differently at Christmas dinner. I can't explain it exactly. She took up more space. She told a story about something that happened at work, and she told it all the way to the end without looking at Gerald to see if he was listening or approving. Small thing. The kind of small thing that is also enormous if you know what it cost. Nana Bet is in remission. Her last scan was clean. She is back in her garden, which is frankly thriving in a way that seems personal, like the tomatoes and the herbs and the marigolds she plants along the border all know she came back, and they are responding accordingly. I visit her on Sunday mornings when I can. I pull weeds while she directs me from her lawn chair. She tells me about the neighbors and the church and whatever she's been reading. She never brings up Gerald. She doesn't need to. Before I leave, I always water the marigolds. She planted them the first summer she and my grandfather moved to Clover Street, before the children came, when the house was still new and everything was possible. Gerald once tried to convince her to replace them with something more modern. She said no. She has said no every summer since. I think about that a lot, how she held that line without drama or confrontation. Just no. These stay. She didn't have the language or the circumstances to hold all the lines she should have held. But she held that one. And 40 years later, those marigolds are still blooming along the fence of the house on Clover Street, bright orange and yellow, stubborn and alive, as if they understand exactly what they represent. I want to tell you the thing I have learned from all of this, because I think it's the thing that matters. The people who tell you that you're too much, too ambitious, too focused, too unwilling to shrink, they are not giving you information about yourself. They are giving you information about what your success costs them. And that is their problem to carry, not yours. My grandmother could not fight for herself the way I had to fight for myself. The world she grew up in did not offer her the same weapons. But she built something quietly over decades. She kept her garden. She raised a daughter who raised me. She attended every appointment she could, and when she couldn't, she sent me. She taught me by example that you do not need permission from the people who underestimate you. You just have to keep doing the work. My mother is learning. Late, but she's learning. She started taking a class at the community center this fall. Art history. Something she always wanted to do, but never felt like she had the right to want. She shows me photographs of the paintings they discuss, and her eyes are bright in a way I haven't seen in years. She told me recently that she'd said no to something. I won't say what it was because it's her story to tell, but she said it with a kind of quiet satisfaction that was new, like she'd discovered a muscle she didn't know she had and was figuring out how to use it. I'm proud of her in a way that I don't have the exact words for. People ask me if I regret speaking up at Nana Betty's celebration, if the conversation was worth the disruption. I tell them the truth. It wasn't about disruption. It was about accuracy. I was not going to sit at my grandmother's table at her celebration, in the yard she had tended for 40 years, and allow a false story about me to go unchallenged. Not because I needed everyone to applaud me, because silence was the thing that had cost my family the most over the years, and I had watched it cost them long enough. My grandmother fought cancer at 75 with a treatment protocol I helped her understand. She is in remission. She is in her garden. And she is not confused about who showed up. That is enough. That is more than enough. Is there someone in your life who has been telling your story for you? Someone who has decided what your ambition means, what your success says about them, what space you're allowed to take up in your own family? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Because the truth is, every family has a Gerald. Not every family has a grandmother who, at the end of her cancer treatment, at her own celebration table, corrects her son in front of everyone and says, "She was there. She was there at every appointment that mattered." I still get choked up thinking about it. Not because I needed her to defend me, because I understood what it cost her. And because she paid it anyway. That is love without conditions. And it changed the shape of things. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been talked over in a room where you belonged, if you've held your tongue to keep a peace that was never really yours to keep, please hit like and subscribe. Not for me. For the next person who needs to hear that taking up space is not the same as causing trouble. And if you haven't had enough yet, there's another story linked in the description. It's about a woman who showed up to her own sister's wedding and was seated at a back table with people who barely knew the bride. She didn't make a scene. What she did instead was so much better. I think you'll want to hear how it ends. I'm Simone. I'm 29. I'm a licensed pharmacist, and every Sunday morning I pull weeds in my grandmother's garden while the marigolds bloom along the fence, whether anyone gives them permission or not. And I learned from those flowers that survival sometimes is its own kind of answer.